Hello and welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. It's Anthony Chiang. Anthony, what's going on?
I shouldn't have panicked 2 weeks ago. The Heat are again the Heat. They won
Yes.
5 in a row. But I'm good. How are you, David?
Yeah, vintage Heat stuff right now, right? 5-game winning streak, a winning record below 500, below negative point differential, despite
Classic
their
Heat.
winning record. Classic Heat. Closing games out in the fourth quarter. Duncan Robinson cooking Victor Wembanyama. It's just like we all expected.
It's unbelievable. I mean, we'll get into it, but the internal improvement on this team, that's what they kind of needed. We spoke about it, David. And, pretty much everybody has gotten better. Like, Duncan, Bam, Tyler, Haywood Highsmith.
The only guy who hasn't is Jimmy Butler, right? And
Jimmy Butler, right? Which
there wasn't much room for to go up from where he was.
No,
before.
as long as he cares in the playoffs, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Right. So but everyone else. I mean, Jaime Hawkins obviously was on the team last year, but just he's been a positive, a bright spot through the first couple of weeks. So there's a lot of good things going on, a lot of encouraging things. But yeah, 10 games in, 6-4, considering their schedule. It could be a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, as you kind of joked, we were, I don't want to say panicked, but we were, there was a lot of reasons for concern.
Yeah.
They did not look good in the first 2 weeks of the season. They had the still on this road trip, obviously, but this tough 9 road games, 9 out of 10 games on the road.
Yeah.
They're in the middle of right now. So, there was a lot to be worried about. I think last week we came back on and it was after the Lakers game, right, that we recorded, and it was finally seemed like they were turning the early season corner, and have obviously kept building on it. So we're 10 games in. We figure, this is all you're doing because we're kind of copying a story you wrote. So if you want to follow along at home,
I'm just gonna read the story actually. Yeah. The podcast, so here you go.
Anthony broke down for 10 observations in the first 10 games of the season. We'll go obviously a little bit more in depth on them on the show, but that's a good signpost, I think. 10. There's only so much you can observe from 10 games, and I think you hit the big ones. So let's get into it. We'll kind of run through what your 10 biggest thoughts from the first couple weeks of the season are. Do you wanna kick us off with your number one? I don't know if you ranked these when you were writing them, but you want to kick us off with wherever you want to start.
I didn't rank them. I just kind of whatever popped into my head first.
Yeah.
But number one was just the classic Heat one that we kind of touched on a little bit. Yeah, we kind of
touched on it already at the top.
One of only 2 teams that entered the week with a winning record despite having a negative point differential.
That's kind of crazy this early in the season that's the case.
Yeah, you would think there'd be more, right?
Right, yeah, that's the kind of thing that usually normalizes as the season goes on. Either a team with a negative point differential and good record, the differential improves, or vice versa. Strange already like this.
But fitting for this team. The other team that fits that category is the Milwaukee Bucks. So
which is pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of. I don't
Did not realize that when I was.
Yeah.
I read your story.
And it's fitting because last season that was kind of we kept writing about in the playoffs. No team has ever advanced not ever, but since at least 2000. That's the furthest I can go back, and the furthest I wanted to go back. No team had ever advanced to the NBA Finals with a negative point differential, and the Heat did it. And this year they're again, they built a winning record despite having a negative point differential because they're winning all these close games. Last year they tied the NBA record for regular season wins by 5 points or less. This year they already have 3. So 3 of their 6 wins are by 5 points or less. I think another one is by 6 points. So really, kind of probably 4 if you want to really count that one. So it's kind of a continuation of last season almost. That team isn't exactly the same, but they're winning games the same way. Their offense isn't great, so they have to kind of win these games close behind, forcing turnovers and making free throws and mid-range jumpers. It's the same formula pretty much.
Yeah, it's they obviously tried to make a splashy move when they went out tried to get Damian Lillard, right? They would have looked very different. Their identity would have totally changed. they would have been we're seeing what happened with the Bucks, right? They went from being this great defensive team to being not so great and a team that has to win with offense. Same thing would have happened for the Heat. Instead, it's what you can do when you have a great foundation of talent, coaching, whatever you want to say, culture. But the Heat, like as we've kind of said, like they were the floor for this team is really high. And they're very similar to last year. I mean, in some ways it kind of feels like they're in a better shape. They're in a better spot early in the season than they were last year. Because I think last year,
for sure, they weren't. Yeah.
They started off, I don't remember what the record was through 10 games. I don't think it was, they had a losing record for a long time last year.
It took a month to get to a winning record.
Like it felt this team came in because the personnel, like as you mentioned, is so similar. Obviously, on the margins, they're different, but for the most part, the like four most important guys are kind of the same as last year. If you want to include like Kyle Lowry as kind of the fourth. And then obviously, and even the guy, Duncan Robinson is a guy we're obviously going to talk about, is kind of a new contributor because his minutes were sporadic last year, but he's been around for so long. This team knew from day one kind of who they are, which last year it felt like it took them a long time to do that. This team on paper might be less talented than last year's, right? When you lose Max Strus and Gabe Vincent. Now, if some of these guys who have improved, if that continues, then that probably offsets some of what you lost. But last year's team was maybe a little more talented, but they struggled to make the playoffs because they dug themselves such a big hole because it took them a really long time to get their identity and all that kind of stuff. This year's team, it doesn't seem like they're going to have that problem. Like, I know the East is better. I know they're only 6-4, which isn't great. It's not. I mean, we saw it last year was a lot worse. Like, I feel much more confident that this team is not going to be fighting for their playoff lives into the final couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, after 10 games last season, this team was 4-6.
Yeah,
and right now they're 6-4, obviously, as we.
And they didn't have a winning record, as you said, until like
December. It was mid-December,
yeah,
and they didn't get 2 games over until January 2nd.
January.
So that's almost not mid-season, but close, like a few weeks away.
Yeah.
So it took them basically almost 3 months to get to where they are right now. So yes, it's very early. Again, these games are like the margin is so thin because these games are close. So it could easily be 5-5 or 4-6. But bottom line is they're 6-4. And they're in a better spot than they were last year, and especially when you consider the schedule. Last year they started with 10 of the first 14 at home. They still started that poorly. This year they've started with all these road games and injuries, and they're 6-4 with a chance to go 7-4 if they beat a bad Charlotte team tomorrow night. So, they're in a good spot. Whether they have a negative point differential or not, you could say, well, this is a fraudulent winning record. They had a negative point differential last year and they got to the finals. So I don't know how much we could even point to that anymore.
I know.
It's just funny.
Yeah. Tying right into the Heat. Number 2 on your list is the defense is once again the way this team is winning games. Entered Monday, 22nd in offensive rating, 9th in defensive rating. It's again more typical Heat, right? What did they finish? Those basically the numbers they finished with last year. It took them a long time. Similarly, it took them a long time to get there last year too, right? The defense was took a really long time to kind of gel. I think finished in the top 10 though last year, right?
It did. It was I think it was 9 actually last year. I'm looking right now. They were 25th in offense last regular season, and 9th in defense.
Yeah, but it took them a long time. They were bottom half of the league in defense, like up until February.
That's why they started so poorly. That's why they started so poorly. Their defense took a while to get on track. I had my doubts of whether Erik Spoelstra could make this a top 10 defense. And again, it's early. They have faced some bad offenses, especially on this trip. They faced 2 of the worst offenses in the league in the Spurs and Memphis. But still, they're number 9 in defense right now with personnel that you could say probably shouldn't be a top 10 defensive team. I know you have Bam and Jimmy, but there are a lot of other guys that aren't plus defenders. But if you know anything about Erik Spoelstra, he's got to find his way to coach the team into being a top 10 defense, whether it's because of all the coverages he uses to kind of keep offenses off balance, the zone, pressuring offenses. You saw what he did to the Hawks by throwing zone at them, pressuring them full court, blitzing, showing, playing, Bam switching out into guards. Like he's always he has so many different defensive tools that he throws at teams that even if the personnel isn't great, he gets the most out of it. And we've seen that so far early on that he can make this a top 10 defense. We've seen it. And Bam obviously helps with that, and Jimmy obviously helps with that. Haywood Highsmith is playing great defense. And this is important because we know this team is very likely not going to be an above average offensive team this season.
And if they want to play slow, right? Like that's another part of it.
Yeah, they're playing a little more pace this year, which is interesting. Some they monitor that usually happens, then they slow down.
And when Kyle's been out there, it's always been a little bit faster, right? Because they're getting on transition more. Obviously, he was hurt for so much of last year.
Yeah, and that bench unit with like Jay Rich and Jaime, and when Kyle's out there, when Tyler was running that bench unit, they play kind of fast. But the Heat tend to do like they'll start out fast.
Yeah, they do.
2 months in, they'll go back to being slow again. So it's like again, it's early. But they need to have a top 10 defense, bottom line, to be a playoff team, I think. Like if they're a mediocre defense, they're going to be fighting their life, like fighting just to get into the playoffs. Look at last year. They were a top 10 defense.
That was the story of last season, team. Right?
Yeah. So they need to at least be where they are right now, 9th, 10th in defense to have a chance to make the playoffs, because we've seen that this offense, the ceiling isn't super high. And that's just the way it is. I mean, maybe this team, they surprise us and all of a sudden they turn into a top 10 offense, but we have this large sample size, and it's hard to say that it's hard to expect that to happen, right? That would be surprising. So, I think that's encouraging, because that was one of the questions I had entering the year. Can this be a top 10 defense? So far, it has been.
Well, I think transition is nicely number 3 on your list. How much of this has to do with Haywood Highsmith jumping into the starting lineup? Heat are 5-0 since he replaced Kevin Love there. I know we've always liked, and the Heat have obviously always liked his defensive ability. And Kevin Love is still a good, useful player. That's obviously not his strength at any point in his career, and especially not at this point in his career. So how much is Haywood Highsmith both just in the starting lineup / his improvement, more minutes for him, and playing well enough to earn more minutes? How much of that do you think has to do with the defense maybe exceeding, I don't want to say exceeding our expectations, because as you mentioned, you just kind of always expect that they're going to be like somewhere between 8 and 10, if no matter who's out there.
Yeah.
But how much of the defense's success, despite some of the personality, you think has to do with Haywood Highsmith?
I think he's played a role for sure. I think, not to discredit the Heat, the schedule has too, right? He stepped in when they played the Wizards. They won that game, which was, again, Wizards are one of the worst teams in the NBA. They play the Lakers. Lakers are not terrible, but they're not good.
Off to a rough start, yeah.
And they were missing like 3 or 4 rotation guys that game. They played Memphis, who had 1 win when the Heat played them. Atlanta was a good win. And then they played the Spurs, who arguably is the worst team in the league right now, considering their defense and offensive rating rankings. So the schedule has helped. Haywood Highsmith has certainly helped. Like, one of the things ever since Bam Adebayo became the starting center, a question has been like, who's going to be in the front court with him? That's always like, is it going to work? Who's going to play power forward? That's like a constant question. And Haywood Highsmith has kind of plugged into that spot nicely. He's fit well. His versatility on defense has been really impressive, because he was in Atlanta. He was guarding Trae Young. He started on Trae Young. He guarded DeJounte Murray at times. He stripped both guys, I think. He picked up like Murray's dribble, which is something you don't see often. He forced a turnover on Victor Wembanyama last night. Like, he's guarding almost every position out there, definitely 1 through 4. He's a good rebounder. He's gotten cold from outside shooting. He started hot. Last few games he hasn't made many outside shots, but he's definitely an improved player. He's probably a full-time starter at this point, because he just seems to fit well with that group. And that group, when Tyler Hero was healthy, I think I have it in the story, was like outscoring teams by the lineup of Lowry, Hero, Jimmy, Highsmith, and Bam was outscoring teams by 13.4 points per 100 possessions. Limited sample size of 37 minutes, but still a good sign. And I think a sign that they'll stick with that starting lineup for the foreseeable future, when they're healthy.
What's next?
Bam. Just off to a really awesome start. He's a very good player.
He's good. Yeah, we should talk about him, I guess.
Averaging career on points, rebounds, blocks. Looks like he's a legit like all NBA caliber player right now. Like I don't know if there's 3 centers better than him in the league. And he's definitely on the fringe there. If he's not, just amazing at defense again. Like allowing like
I
half
gotta
a
say,
point.
I know we're 10 games in. He's probably not even the favorite, but I feel kind of good about my Bam Defensive Player of the Year prediction at the top, because if he play, it's not quite. I don't know if it's not like the Gold Glove, right? Where the Gold Glove, you got to be a good enough hitter, right? Like that was always the joke, is like you win your Gold Glove with your bat. It's not quite like that for Defensive Player of the Year in the NBA, but if Bam averages like 24 and 11 and also plays elite defense and is an all-star starter or something, right? Like all of a sudden, you just get more attention. You elevate past like the Marcus Smarts and Jaren Jackson Jr.'s of the world, right? Who are like one-way kind of guys. And if you do what you're doing, where you're great, not just a great two-way guy, but like a great two-way guy who's like an elite offensive player kind of, which, he's not quite that, but he's really good and having a monster year. Like, I feel good about that pick I made. I don't know if he's going to do it, but I think he's trending in the right way for me to have a shot to get that one right.
No, definitely. He's been, obviously we know Bam is good, but this is the best I've ever seen him play.
Yeah, he's been awesome.
He's been spectacular. And one thing that's really stood out is he's not known as like the traditional rim protector, but he's always been a good rim protector in his own way, like just the way he kind of blocks the paint with his on-ball defense, cuts off guys and stuff. Yeah, but he's averaging a career 1.4 blocks a game.
Yeah, that's
teams are shooting 47. Players that he's guarding are shooting 47.7% from within 6 feet of the basket, which is basically 14% lower than their usual shooting percentage from that range. Like he's been really good at protecting the rim this year, better than previous years. So it's like another element to Bam's not all defense, but defensive player of the year case, where he's now all of a sudden he's an elite rim protector, like by all the metrics. So just a really, really good start offensively. That mid-range, still doesn't get to the rim probably as much as you want, right, for a big man, but he's hitting that mid-range even more efficiently now, and he's drawing more. I think he's top 10 in free throw attempts, averaging almost 8 free throw attempts a game. So that kind of makes up for the small amount of rim attempts, getting those easy points to the line. So yeah, just he's one of the biggest bright spots I think so far of the first few weeks. Is he a top 10 player in the NBA already? Is that too much? Is that a stretch?
It feels a little high. So the one thing with Bam is he does tend to have. Again, this is his best. This is probably the best 10-game stretch he's maybe ever had. But he does tend to have these little 10-game stretches. I'll be interested in another 10 games or another 20 games. Will there be that like 2-week stretch where Heat fans are going crazy about how he's not quite aggressive enough, right? Like he does get on little heaters for a defense first center. He kind of gets on heaters as an offensive player. This one kind of feels like a little different. Maybe it's just because it's the beginning of the season, so there's like
it's a fresh start.
We only have one. We only have one sample size, right? Like if he had a whatever like typical first 10 games, and then his numbers would all be a couple points lower, a rebound or 2 lower, half a block lower. But I don't know. Do you feel like this is has something changed fundamentally there with him? Are there things you see that he wasn't doing before?
I think the rim protection is one thing. I think the rebounding. I don't think he's ever rebounded this well.
No,
he's last 4 games, 11 rebounds, 17 rebounds, 11 rebounds, 19 rebounds. Like that's kind of new, right? But your point is valid because he's a guy that depends on mid-range shots to score a lot of his points. And sometimes those aren't just going to go in. You're going to go through it. That's what happened last season. Like he started out really well, and then after the All-Star break, he was not hitting that mid-range shot as
and then that drives people crazy because it doesn't. It feels like he's not attacking.
He's not attacking.
What he is, right? He's a good mid-range player. You mentioned even though the rim attempts are not super high right now. Now, obviously, those free throws, those are created, and those are created by drives to the rim, right? He's not taking shots at the rim because he's getting fouled before he can shoot them. But yeah, he's to me, the free throw numbers are what's most telling. If he can keep that at what do you say it is right now?
7.8 a game.
Yeah, if he can keep that over 7.5 ish, like that makes a huge difference for him.
He averaged 5.4 free throws a game.
Yeah, like that's an extra attempt at the rim basically that you're getting fouled on per game. So
yeah, an extra point and a half maybe, right?
Yeah,
like so.
And he's a good free throw shooter, so.
Yeah, he's an 80% free throw shooter. So yeah, I mean that's important. So we'll see if they can continue that, the rim protection and the rebounding, and like you said, if I have to look back and see, but I wonder how many guys that won Defensive Player of the Year if their defense have not finished in the top 5. Like if he finishes like 8th or 9th, like the Heat finishes 8th or 9th in defense, like will that hurt him?
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know. I have to look and see, but that's something that kind of. When you said that kind of piqued my interest. Of like, I wonder how often that's happened.
Yeah, and the offense, the balance, I think is probably going to be his strength if he can keep this up all year long, like I said. But in the NBA, that doesn't, we've seen a lot of one way. I mean, how many? Pretty much the last. I guess Giannis won a Defensive Player of the Year at some point recently, but other than that, it's been Rudy Gobert won it so many times. Like Bam would be one of the better offensive players to win it
for sure.
Recently,
for sure.
like it. Be him and Giannis. The other guys are, I think, Gobert,
Smart,
Draymond, I think won, right?
Jaren Jackson. So. Yeah, he's other than Giannis, he's the best.
Yeah, and comparable-ish to Draymond, I guess, at that point in his career. So, all right. Real quick, Tyler Hero, you have on your list. Obviously, he's hurt right now, so I don't think we need to talk too much about him. We've been pretty positive about him. I mean, he's maybe the guy we've talked about most on this show so far this season, because his step forward, even more maybe than Bam's, has been the reason that this team is in a better spot than they were at this time last year.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that he went down with the role he was on. Career highs in points, assists, steals so far, shooting 41% on threes. Just so important to this offense of just kind of, he lifts the ceiling, whatever that low ceiling is. He lifts the ceiling of the Heat's offense a little bit just because of his natural scoring ability, his ability to create for himself, others. He's gotten better as a playmaker, just getting better at going to the line, drawing contact, attacking. So he'll be off the next at least 2 weeks. I'll probably imagine 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks. It's a pretty nasty ankle sprain. So far, 2-0 without him, though. So keep finding a way to win games while he's out.
Yeah, and big that, so much of the struggle, I think, early last season was about the starting lineup, right? And it was like the Tyler insertion did not necessarily go smoothly. Was going better this year, so that was a real positive sign.
Still, like him and Jimmy still. Yeah,
it's still weird, right?
They're still similar, a little clunky sometimes. Yeah, but yeah, I think there were signs of like growth and progress with just him, Bam, and Jimmy kind of working together in different actions. And that was going well, and then obviously this like puts a pause on all that, but. Good news is it wasn't a significant injury, right? Like he should be back at some point in December, I would say.
Let's talk about the most disappointing guy on the team, Jimmy Butler. Only 18.5 points per game. The one guy who, as we said, is not better than he was last year, at least so far.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's like you never know with Jimmy. Like he's just, he's known to like really not turn it up until after the All-Star break. And it's still so early. It's not even Thanksgiving yet, so I guess it's not surprising. But yeah, averaging 18.5 points, 42% shooting from the field. Both would be the lowest since the 2013-14 season, so the lowest in almost a decade. Free throws even are down 6.9 free throws a game. That would be his lowest since joining the Heat. Just numbers down across the board, really. But he is hitting his threes. 8 of 17 from three. So there's that.
Also, this kind of ties in his usage rate down 2.5% basically. You're seeing the and I think it makes a lot of sense for the regular season, right? Like just the fact that Bam and Tyler are both, I think, at like 28 plus.
Yeah, 28 plus. Yeah.
So if those
career highs for both so far,
it'll go a long way if those guys can shoulder the load throughout the regular season. come playoff time, Jimmy's is going to be 30 something or whatever.
Jimmy will have 35% usage in the playoffs.
But I mean, we've seen it every time the Heat make a run. It's he runs out of gas eventually, right? So every mile you can keep off him, I think is a big deal.
Yeah, again, I think that was part of like the fourth quarter struggles early on was Bam and Tyler are taking on bigger offensive roles, and that's a little different, right? So it's going to change a little bit of like the way the offense works. You saw some of like, again, the clunkiness late in games with them, with those three on the court together. So it is a little bit of a shift. Kyle Lowry also team low usage rate as a starting point guard, 11.3% would be the lowest of his career. I would expect Jimmy and Kyle's usage rate to go up now that Tyler's out, right? I think the Heat need that to happen. But just something that really stuck out to me was not only Jimmy's usage rate going down a little bit, but Kyle.
Yeah, that's going to be, I feel like, pretty low for an NBA point guard, just period, which obviously the Heat play, as we've said a million times. Yeah. They don't use their point guard in anything close to a traditional way, but yeah, still pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's again, I would expect that to go up, especially with Tyler Hero out. So we'll see. And even Eric Spoelstra mentioned, like, as soon as Tyler went out, like the next day at practice, he's like, we need to lean into our defense now, and we need Jimmy's usage rate to go up. Yeah. So I think you're going to see both those things next few weeks.
Let's do some quick hits to close this out. Thomas Bryant, what have you thought of him so far?
Yeah, I think so. Entering the season, it was, everyone was encouraged. He seemed to be like an answer to solve the non-Bam minutes. Played well in the preseason. But for whatever the reason, first 10 games have not gone great for him. The Heat has been outscored by 10.6 points per 100 possessions with Thomas Bryant on the court, basically whenever Bam is on the bench. So that's not good. It kind of reminds you of last season a little bit, where they just the non-Bam minutes were a mess. And you've seen Spo go to Kevin Love the last two games at that backup center spot. And Love's been good. The last two games since Love has started playing as the backup center, he has outscored opponents by a total of 19 points with Love on the court and Bam on the bench. So, again, only 2 games. We'll see if it continues. It seems like a fluid situation. In San Antonio on Sunday, both Thomas Bryant and Kevin Love played as the backup center. So it might be matchup-based. It might just be based on who's playing well in the moment. But one thing is for sure, like, it doesn't seem like Thomas Bryant has as strong of a hold on that role as he did a few weeks ago.
Duncan Robinson, we teased it at the top. Just better, as I think we actually talked pretty extensively about him last week. Now that I'm remembering.
Yeah. Deepest dog on the team. Duncan Robinson.
The shooting percent, the 3-point percentage is not what you expect, but his all-around game is, drastically improved.
Did you see the movie, the Smitty he put on Wemby last night? Did you see that?
Yeah.
How could you have not missed it on social media? But
yeah,
did you see a step back 3? Did you see the James Harden step back 3? Did you see that?
We talked last week about just the difference that, I don't remember what the number we said, but like 3 assists a game or whatever would do for him. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but it's just a big picture. He is a much more complete basketball player right now than we've always seen flashes. He's always been good, I think, at 1 or 2 dribbles, and then
he's good at finishing on the basket. He's tall,
finisher, like either finish or make an easy pass, because the defense has moved so much to chase him out to the 3-point line, and then if he gets a step and he can drive to the rim, the defense is moving again. He's a smart player, and I think the big thing there is he's got a leash, right? He's like, if he was shooting 35% from 3 right now, or if he was doing this last year, he wouldn't be playing. They'd have Max Strus out there instead. Right. Now they got to play him, 1, because they don't have a lot of shooting, and then 2, just they don't have a lot of bodies. And he's certainly, one of the 7 best players on this team, right? Like 8 best player. Like he's a guy who's got to be out there, because they don't.
It makes the offense better. He makes the offense better. That's just the bottom line. Like, defensively, yes, he's limited, all that. He's gotten a little better. He's always going to compete on the defensive end. But he's always made the offense better just with his presence out there, because he's always a threat, and teams look at him as a threat. They send 2-3 guys at him when he's coming off a screen. Like, he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the league. He's earned that respect. But the one number when I was doing this piece that like shocked me. He has a career high. Okay,
Yeah, this
career high
number is mind-blowing.
22.9% of his field goal makes this season have been unassisted. 22.9%. Doesn't seem like super high, but when you compare it to his previous career high, which was 6.6%, that is like such a drastic.
Oh, that wasn't
improvement.
even the number from that paragraph that blew my mind. Mine is he's already got 17 buckets in the paint this year, which puts him on pace for 139.
Yeah.
And his previous career high was 49.
I don't know if he can continue.
He's going to have that by the end of December.
In a couple of weeks, he'll have that at this pace. Again, I don't know if he'll continue this, but it looks like it's sustainable. I mean, he's done it pretty consistently to the first 2 weeks.
He's going to have more than, what would you say, 49. He's going to have more than 49 buckets in the paint this year.
He's just a lot better. His handle's just a lot better. I think that's the biggest thing. Like his handle, before he was always a good cutter, made timely cuts. Like, again, a good finisher on the basket. Always convert a high percentage of shots around the rim. But his off the dribble game is what's grown. And that's a credit to him because there's so many guys on the league shooters on the league that their 3-point shot stops falling or
I mean, it was Duncan. It was Duncan for how many years, right? The shot wasn't falling and his game fell apart.
Yeah, and now, I mean, the work he's put in is evident. I mean, he's a much better overall offensive player. He's obviously still known as a 3-point shooter, and that's what makes him an NBA player. But the fact that he could consistently now take guys off the dribble if they're overplaying him, and I mean, he made 2 of the best moves I've probably ever seen him make. In one game. That James Harden step back 3 in the corner was beautiful, and then that little shoulder shimmy move he put on Wemby in the baseline for a reverse layup. Again, deepest bag on the team, Duncan. I mean,
not bad. Probably Tyler Hero, but he's up there.
He's up there. Good for Duncan.
Obviously the reason Duncan gets paid the way he does is because he can make 3-pointers, but he would not have gotten paid the way he does if the Heat didn't think he could do stuff like this, right? He got that contract. Yes, most 80% because he was the best 3-point shooter in the league that year, right? Or second best, whatever, behind Steph Curry.
Yeah.
But if he was not, and again, he didn't have this offensive variety yet, but if he wasn't a really high IQ player, if he wasn't a guy who had some physical tools, right? Like those arms give him some stuff that just a lot of other good 3-point shooters don't have.
He's tall, 6'7".
Yeah, 6'7". Those arms, it was always going to let him be pretty good around the rim. Gave him a little bit higher ceiling on defense than even a guy like Tyler Hero, right? But that money is mostly for the 3-point shooting, but you're not getting that if the Heat didn't love a lot of other things about him, and you're just seeing that right now. And the Heat were kind of, they were fortunate that they found so many minimum guys who could fill in for Tyler when his shot wasn't falling, that it didn't kill them. Now, if he was not playing this well, it would be pretty crippling for the Heat. And but I think to an extent he's always had a little bit of this in him that we just didn't get to see because the leash was a lot shorter.
For sure, and also just the work ethic, like put in the work behind the scenes while he was out. Like
he was a Division III guy. We all know his stories.
Yeah. So he put in the work to develop other parts of his game, and it's paying off for him and the Heat right now.
Last one, I'm swapping out your last one to do your bonus one instead because I want to talk about Jaime Jaquez. Who's just been great. I tweeted the other day Heat fans getting annoyed at their boring draft pick and then absolutely willing to die for the guy 6 months later is my favorite tradition. Same thing happened with Tyler Hero. Didn't really see it with Jovic, I guess, but I wasn't around for Bam. I don't remember what the ideal feeling was around Bam, but Tyler Hero definitely, there's some parallels there to me. Jaquez older, obviously the ceiling's not as high as even a guy like Hero, but he's been exactly what this team needs.
Yes, this is solid. He just looks NBA ready from the start. Doesn't really make many mistakes. Much better defender than I thought he was going to be immediately. Offensively, played a bigger role with Hero out and with Jimmy out in Atlanta. Scores 20-something points. offense runs through him at times. Again, there's a guy in his second week in the league, pretty much. Second regular season week.
Yeah.
So yes, he's 22.
And did not play a lot in summer league. Did not play a lot in the preseason.
No. Yeah, and was on a minutes limit for the first couple of weeks. Like I think that was the first.
We thought he was. We were like, when are we going to see him again?
Yeah. So it's that's been like, for a team that brought back so many guys. He's been a nice addition for them. Just a guy you can really plug into almost any lineup. He's versatile, can guard different positions, stays in front of guys, has good instincts, good cutter. The one thing I would say is obviously his 3-point shot isn't there yet. I think he's shooting under 30%. Teams leave him open a lot of times, which hurts the spacing. So it's hard to have him and Jimmy and Bam on the court together. But when Jimmy was on Atlanta, he basically was plugged into the Jimmy spot in the starting lineup, and they were running offense to him in the post. So he's just a good, like we always say, like, you know, when Jimmy goes to the bench, you can't replace Jimmy, but he's a guy who plays
when he misses 20 games, right?
So just 18th pick, you look at the other guys that were drafted around him at that time. Again, it's early on in all their careers. It looks like the Heat hit on that pick for sure.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts?
Drew Smith, another guy who I think when he got the 14th roster spot, a lot of people were like, why? Huh? What did he do to get that spot? And you've seen like immediately he's had to play because of the injury issues, and Tyler's out now, and early on there were other guys missing time. And he's been solid. Like he's averaging the third most deflections per game in the league. He's hitting over 40% of his threes. Another guy that he just finds these undrafted guys. He was 3 years in the system, 3 training camps with the team, finally broken, gotten the roster this year. And he's been a reliable option, depth option at guard for them. And he's been needed, and he's produced early on this season. So credit to him. I don't want to end this podcast without giving him a shout out because he deserves it.
All right, I think we can close things out there. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. Anything exciting coming along these days?
The Canes. They look better. I mean, they have 4 losses, but they look.
Canes basketball. They're playing right now. I don't know.
I saw they're in a close one with FIU.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was by 1 point at halftime, which. When people listen to this podcast, they'll know whether the Canes won or lost. But yeah,
it might be over now. Honestly, they're up. Oh, they're up by 2 with 8 minutes left. Should probably turn that game on. All right, let's get out of here. Watching that game. Thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.